Oh, thank you very much. How to be nervous at your very first talk is to go after Ken Robinson, which I think is arguably one of the greatest TED Talks ever. I was thinking when I was asked to do this, I thought, well, what is it that I can talk usefully about and share some of my experiences? And I wanted to pick up the theme around what I'm calling the foundations of innovation. Over the last 12 years, I've probably worked with hundreds and hundreds of people across the UK who are all trying to take innovation forward, most in the field of healthcare and social innovation. So a lot of people who want to change the world, who want to make people's lives better. And in that time, I've kind of come to realise why some people are able to do this and some people aren't. And I think it goes at a really, really deep level. There's lots of books about innovation. There's lots of talk about the theories of innovation, and there's this kind of MBAs you can do and qualifications. But I actually think if the foundations aren't there, it doesn't happen. And the foundations are to do with stuff that's really deep inside people. There's a quote from George Bernard Shaw. He says, "Reasonable men adapt themselves to the world. Unreasonable men try and adapt the world to them. Only unreasonable people will ever change the world." And I think that's true. There's something fundamentally irrational about thinking the world should be different. Because most of the time we come into the world and we just adapt and we accommodate to it. And for someone to go, I think it can be different, it's a really arrogant and quite irrational place to be. And it's those people, I think, who start to generate real change and real innovation. And I think it starts, for me, one of the most fundamental things is your world belief. And for the vast majority of people, what their world belief is that it's impossible to change this thing. They have an idea and they just go, it's impossible. And basically, that's a complete non-starter. If they don't believe it's possible, then you can give people the education, all the support, all the development in the world, and they will never, ever change anything because they fundamentally don't believe it can be done. And the first step is to move people from believing it's impossible to believing it's possible for me, it's possible for them. It is actually possible for me to make this change. And this sounds trivial, because this is just like, it's obvious. We all know this stuff. So, why are we talking about it? Well, I think if we go back to it's impossible, and if you're interested in creativity and change, it's really easy to think, well, of course, you should think things are different. Of course you can do things, it's all about confidence, belief. But believing it's impossible to change is actually a really comfortable place. It's a really warm, secure place. Because if you believe the world can't be any different, then it means it's got nothing to do with you. It means that it's nothing to do with you and what you've done or what you haven't done, that the reason the world's like that or that this problem exists in society, because it's impossible for it to be any different. And that's a nice space to be in. And a lot of people lead lives that for the whole of their lives, they think that nothing in their life, nothing around them, nothing in their community or society can possibly be changed, and it absolves them of all responsibility. And yet, it's very easy to disprove this one. To shift people from saying it's impossible, all you have to do is show someone that's done it. I quite like using the example of Sir Roger Bannister. Sir Roger Bannister was the first man to run the 4-minute mile. And during the 40s, the world record for the mile had basically stayed completely flat. For the 9 years before he actually broke it, it was 4 minutes and 1 second, and it just hadn't changed. And a lot of people believed that was just the limit of human bodies. So there were writers and academic journals who went, look, the human body just can't go any faster. This is how fast it can go. It's muscles, it's legs, we've worked it out, you just can't run 4 minutes. And in 1954, on a racetrack in Oxford, Roger Bannister ran the first 4-minute mile. And what I think is really interesting, and it's not talked about as often, but in the 3 years after that, 16 other people ran the 4-minute mile as well. So there was this whole period of time, people just went, it's a barrier, it can't be done, we've hit the limit, it's impossible. So that absolves us, we don't have to train for it, we don't have to work at it, and suddenly someone says it is possible, then they go, okay, how did he do it? Right, I can pace myself to that. And then, in a very short period of time, 16 other people did it. And suddenly it stopped becoming this impossible barrier. And now it's pretty much the standard. If you want to do running at distance, nationally, you're expected to be a 4-minute mile. 4-minute miles are nothing special now. And so the very easiest way to prove that it's possible is simply to go, okay, someone's done it. But that doesn't take you to the state of believing that you can change it. it actually takes you to what I think is by far the most dangerous and corrosive mental state that people get into. And that's believing, yeah, it's possible, but it's not possible for me. I can't do it. I'm not clever enough. I'm not rich enough. I'm the wrong skin colour. I'm not able-bodied enough. I'm the wrong sexuality. I've grown up in the wrong place. I'm too thick. I'm too ugly. I'm too stupid. I can't do this stuff. Other special people get to do this stuff. I can't. And then all those little fears and all those little voices that are in our heads from childhood and playgrounds and sometimes from teachers and parents and all that stuff about all our deficiencies and all the things we're rubbish at and all the things we'll never achieve, those are things that are massively amplified. And all of a sudden, you've gone from what's quite a safe space to a space of real intense doubt. And that can be really, really corrosive. And the thing is, it's not just people's own self-doubt in themselves. It's the feelings and the perceptions of other people. Because what we often do is we take leaders and we take people who have achieved special things and we kind of airbrush out their faults and then we put them on a pedestal and we go, these are special people, these are special, amazing people that change the world, and they're not like you because they're perfect and they're clever and they're bright and they're brave and they don't have all of those human failings that you've got, so they did this amazing thing, and there's a huge gulf between them and you. There's an amazing writer called Meg Barker who talks about the crab bucket. She said, if you look at a bucket of crabs, what's interesting is the crabs ideally would like to be out of the bucket, and they huddle at the bottom for warmth. And if you watch a bucket of crabs, what happens is when a crab tries to get out, it's the other crabs that pull them down. So most crabs believe they can never escape the bucket. One or two go, actually, I think I can. And they go, no, 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 no. You can't leave the bucket. This is our bucket. This is our special place. It's a scary place outside the bucket. You're not good enough as a crab. You can't do it. You can't survive. You have to stay with us. Because the moment you start thinking you can change the world, and other people go, well, actually, that then means I could maybe change the world. And that means that maybe the world not being changed is because of something I've done or something I've not done. And suddenly the onus goes a lot more on them. And you need to move people from this, because this is a really corrosive state. And one of the stories I tell that I think it's inspired me, I came across a story about 10 years ago, is the story of a girl called Melissa Poe. Has anyone in the room heard of Melissa Poe? I think it's one of my life ambitions is to get more people to know about her story. Melissa Poe is a 9-year-old girl. This is her when she was 9 years old, playing in the woods near her house. And Melissa Poe one day watched a television program called Highway to Heaven. I don't know if everyone remembers it. Had Michael Landon, who used to be in Little House on the Prairie. It was on Sunday afternoons. It was the kind of program you'd watch if you lost the remote control and you couldn't be bothered to get off the couch. And you're like, oh, I'll watch this then. And it was the story of this angel that came to Earth, and it was all very kind of heartwarming and teary stuff, had a moral every week. And there was one episode that was about the environment, and it really affected Melissa. And so Melissa wrote a letter to President George Bush I, saying, I want you to do something about the environment. I'm 9 years old. I'd like there to be a world when you grow up. You know, please do something about it. And unsurprisingly, he didn't write back. So being what I can only imagine must have been a really precocious 9-year-old child, she took copies of the letter and she put them up on local billboards and posters. It's like, this is the letter I've sent to the president and he's not done anything. And it just connected with other children. And something weird happened. Other children went, yeah, do you know, we should do something about this. So she formed a little after-school club. So this 9-year-old girl got together with some of her other 9-year-old friends and said, why don't we do a little something about the environment? Why don't we clean up litter? Why don't we tidy the place up? Why don't we plant some shrubs? Why don't we plant some trees? And so she created an organisation called Kids Face. It was a little after-school club. And word started to spread, and she got a few more friends. And then a neighbouring school said, oh, that's really cool. We could do this. We could practically do something about our world and our environment. And they said, wouldn't it be amazing if we could plant 1 million trees? Which is just the world's most preposterous thing. I mean, to say to a 9-year-old girl, you're going to plant 1 million trees, you're just like, no, all of it. You know, we could sit in a room, we'd Project Planet and we'd Gantt chart it, and we'd go, no, that's ridiculous. That's never going to happen. 10 years later, FACE has 300,000 members in 15 countries. It's the world's largest youth environmental organisation. And before Melissa Poe was 20 years old, they planted 1 million trees. Now, if I said to most people in this room, right, here's your project. Here's your latest thing. It's come down from on high. Your project for the next month is recruit 300,000 people, plant 1 million trees in 15 countries. You'd be like, oh, God, no. And there'd be bids and infrastructure and laptops and iPods and Skype calls, and it would be an enormous thing. And probably we wouldn't pull it off. And it's hard to think of anybody who's got less resources than a 9-year-old girl. It's hard to think of anyone who she had no access to technology, she had no access to money, she had no authority. I'm sure everyone laughed at her. It's a preposterous idea. And yet she has far less power, far less influence, far less resources than anybody watching this. Melissa Poe had tons less than everyone, and yet was able to do this amazing thing. And I think the only way that you can get people to realise that, yes, they can change it, is by pointing out that, yeah, there are people who've probably got less skills and less resources and more frailties and more foibles, and they're also able to do it. And at the point when people believe it's possible for me, then a transformation happens. Because then at that point, people are open to, well, okay, it's possible. How do I do it? Because until you get to that belief that you can do everything you like with someone, and just in their head they go, it's words, it's a great theory, it'll never ever happen to me. But the belief in itself isn't enough. And I think the next stage for me, I think there's 2 levels of foundation. I think there's a foundational belief of innovation, which is that it is possible for you to innovate. And to do that, you've got to move through some really scary thought processes. And the second is, well, how do you actually do it? And as I said, there's a lot of literature about this, but in my experience, it tends to boil down to about 4 things. The first is we need to understand the relationship between innovation and fear. Innovation and fear are just 2 sides of the same thing. If you're going to do something different, it's going to be scary. You could fail. You're likely to fail. It could go really badly wrong. And if you're starting from that point of view where you think, well, this might not work, no one's ever done it before, there's an even bigger chance it's going to fail. So the first thing you need to do is you need to fail often. Because if you're not failing often, you're not innovating. If you're really pushing things forward, you're going to be failing, and you're going to be failing a lot. All the really groundbreaking social innovation that's ever happened has been because people have failed, and they've failed a lot. You need to fail small, though, because if you fail, and you fail so catastrophically and so publicly and so embarrassingly that you never work again, and that you lose your house, and that you lie alone in a gutter, then you're not really doing the world any favours either. And for a lot of people, they don't ever have a failure until they get quite senior, and it's a very public failure, and that's really difficult. So a lot of people need to just build up their tolerance of actually trying something, failing small, failing survivable, making it so that you as an individual can survive the failure and move on to the next thing without causing too much damage. But you need to be failing. If you're not failing often and small, then you're not really changing anything. But then I think comes what I think is probably the biggest secret around innovation, and that's to be imperfect and to give ourselves the permission to be these kind of fragile human beings with foilings and fables and problems and all of those things that we're not good enough at. Because if you look again at a lot of the people who've done amazing things, we often airbrush them and push them on pedestals. And when you really explore their lives, you realise they had exactly the same doubts. So you have, some of my heroes like Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Churchill, had enormous self-doubt. Churchill was crippled by depression, had massive mental health problems, and just went, okay, I have these problems, I have these self-doubts, I have these failings, I may not be clever enough or bright enough, but I can move forward. And Margaret Sanger was a nurse who basically pioneered the worldwide contraception movement, and did the research that led to the pill, and actually founded centres all over the world. Never thought she was clever enough. Always thought someone else should be doing this, and she was only there because, there was no one else around. The first hospice was only done in 1967, the first modern hospice. Cicely Saunders said, do you know what? Maybe people shouldn't die in pain in hospital. Maybe we could do something different. A crazy idea at the time, now seen as a worldwide norm. but someone that never really thought they were clever enough, never thought they were able, never thought they were privileged enough, never thought they had the right connections, just thought, well, I'm a frail, vulnerable human being. And I think the dirty little secret is not only that imperfect, frail, flawed human beings can change the world, the reality is they're the only people who ever have changed the world. The world has only ever been changed by frail, vulnerable, messed up human beings who have doubts and have fears and are bad at things and are rubbish at things and have people around them going they don't succeed. They're the only people that have ever done anything. And until we accept the fact that that's who we are, those are the people that change the world, and this stuff is okay, then it's really hard to move forward. And the very last step is you can't do it yourself. There's just too much stuff to do on your own. So you need to connect with other vulnerable, messed up, frail, imperfect human beings who aren't good enough. And when you get a bunch of people who are all frail and vulnerable and not good enough and not clever enough and not rich enough and not pretty enough, and they start to get together and they support each other, that's really when the groundbreaking stuff happens. And it's okay to not want to do this. It's okay for people to go, this actually sounds like a lot of emotional work, this sounds like a lot of soul searching, I'm not really sure this is the path for me. The last thought I'd like to give is a quote from Gordon Mackenzie, and it's one of my favourite quotes about innovation. He says, every one of you has a masterpiece within you. And if you go to your deathbed, never having painted that masterpiece, it will never get painted. Nobody else can paint that idea that's inside you, that masterpiece that's inside you. If you go to your deathbed, it won't get painted. You're the only one that can do this. Thank you very much.